The thing that saved Princess Malin was a smell of hot dust, and I nearly talked myself out of trusting it. I have stood a great many posts in my years with the household guard, and I have learned that the body notices wrongness before the mind consents to it. A door left 3 fingers wider than it was the night before. A footfall in a corridor that should have been empty. The particular hush that falls over a room where someone has just stopped speaking. My name is Edrin Halloway, and on the night this begins I was a sergeant of 11 years standing, assigned to the private wing of the Royal House of Harrowgate, and I was doing the least glamorous thing a guard does, which is walking the nursery landing at the turn of the hour, when I smelled hot dust where there had never been hot dust before. You will think that a small thing to build a story on. So did I, that first night. Let me set it properly, because the smell means nothing until you understand the room it came from. Princess Malin was 9 years old. She was the youngest daughter of Princess Alara and the granddaughter of King Alaric, and she was the sort of child a palace does not deserve, and should be grateful for anyway, grave and watchful and quietly funny, given to long silences that the household mistook for shyness, and that I had come to understand, were simply the sound of a serious person thinking. She had lost things a 9-year-old should not have to lose. Her grandmother, the late Queen Isolde, had died before Malin was old enough to keep more than a handful of memories, and the house had never quite recovered its warmth after. There was a new queen now, the Queen Consort Morwenna, and the wing had grown colder and more watchful under her, in ways I could feel on my skin at every post and could not have proven to any court in the realm. Malin's nursery sat at the end of the private landing, a corner room with tall windows facing the east garden, and it was the one place in that whole guarded house that still felt like a child lived in it rather than a small adult being managed. There were her books stacked crooked on the sill. There was the low table where she took her breakfast when she was unwell. There was the tall-backed nursery chair by the window that had been her mother's before her and her grandmother's before that, and on that chair, every night, sat her bear. The bear had a name, though only 3 or 4 of us in the household knew it, because Malin did not hand her private things to just anyone. His name was Barnaby. He was old, properly old, an heirloom bear, honey-brown mohair worn to the nub at the ears and the paws, one glass eye a shade lighter than the other because it had been replaced once long ago by a seamstress who could not perfectly match the first. He had belonged to Princess Alara when she was small, and to a cousin before that, and he had the particular boneless slump of a toy that has been loved by 3 generations of children into the shape of comfort itself. Malin slept with him some nights and set him on the nursery chair others, and either way he was the last thing she looked at before her lamp went out, and the first thing she reached for in the gray of morning. I tell you all of this so you understand why. When I walked the landing that night and smelled hot dust coming from Malin's nursery, my whole body stopped before my mind had finished the thought. Hot dust is the smell of a machine, the fine gray lint that gathers on anything that draws current, cooking gently against a warm surface. It is the smell of a lamp left on too long, or the back of a wireless set, or, and this is the thought I did not want, a small electrical thing running where no small electrical thing ought to be. There was no lamp on in Malin's room. I could see the dark line under the door, and the princess had been abed 2 hours. And yet, standing on that landing at the turn of midnight, I smelled the faint scorched cotton warmth of something drawing power in a room that should have held nothing but a sleeping child and a very old bear. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it is the part I am least proud of. I did nothing. I told myself it was the radiator, or the old wiring in the east wing that was forever giving the electricians grief. I told myself a sergeant does not open a sleeping princess's door on the strength of a smell, and that if I went blundering in there at midnight I would frighten the child, wake the household, and have a poor answer when the Queen Consort's chamberlain asked me why. All of that was true. All of that was also exactly the reasoning a careful man uses to walk past the thing he does not want to have found. I finished my round. I signed the landing book, and I lay awake in the barrack loft with the smell of hot dust in my nose, telling myself I was a fool. But I went back the next night, and the smell was there again. And the third night, I stopped telling myself it was the radiator. Here is the thing about a smell. You cannot show it to your captain. You cannot enter it in the landing book. If I went to Captain Roderick and said, "Sir, I believe there is a machine running in the princess's nursery because it smells of hot dust," he would rightly ask me what machine, and where, and how I knew, and I would have nothing to give him but the twitch in the back of my own neck. And in a household where the Queen Consort's people held half the keys and all the grudges, a sergeant who made an accusation he could not stand up would not be a sergeant much longer. I had seen it happen to better men than me, so I did the only thing I could think to do, which was to find out for myself quietly before I opened my mouth to anyone. I chose the morning. Malin took her lessons in the East schoolroom from 9 until noon, and her nurse, a tired, kind woman named Orla who had been with Alara's children since they were born, would take that hour to air the nursery and change the linen. Orla I trusted. Not because I had tested her, you cannot test everyone, but because I had watched her for 2 years fuss over that child with a tenderness that cannot be faked, and because when the household had grown cold under Morwenna, Orla had grown warmer, the way good people do, to fill the gap. So on the third morning I came to the nursery door while Orla was stripping the little bed, and I asked her plainly whether I might look at something. She was not surprised, which surprised me. "It's the bear, isn't it?" she said. I had not said one word about the bear. Orla straightened up with the pillowcase in her hands and looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since. It was the look of someone who has been carrying a worry alone and is deciding in the moment whether to set half of it down on you. "He's warm," she said finally. "Barnaby, I noticed it a week ago." I picked him up to plump the chair cushion, and he was warm right through, in the middle of him, warm as a loaf out of the oven, and it was a cold morning and the fire not yet built up. I told myself it was the sun off the window. But there's been no sun some of those mornings, Sergeant, and he's still warm, and I've been afraid to say a thing to anybody, because who do you say it to? Who do you tell that a little girl's teddy bear is warm in the middle, and you don't know why? That was the moment the floor tilted under me, and I have never quite got it level since. I asked her to bring me the bear. Orla lifted Barnaby off the nursery chair and carried him to me the way you carry a sleeping infant, both hands, careful, and set him in my arms, and I felt it at once. The wrongness Orla had felt. The low, steady warmth at the core of him, faint but unmistakable, the warmth of a thing that has been running for hours. I turned him over in the morning light. He was to any eye exactly what he was, a battered, beloved, 3 generations old bear, mohair worn to the weave, one eye a shade too pale. But I have handled enough kit in my years to know the weight of things, and Barnaby did not weigh what a bear that size should weigh. There was a density low in his belly, under the stuffing, a small hard mass that shifted when I tilted him, and that a child's arms would never notice through a night's sleep, but that a soldier's hands noticed at once. I found the seam along his back within a minute. It had been opened and closed again by a skilled hand, the stitches even and small, but it was not the same thread as the rest of him, which had been sewn 30 years ago in a slightly heavier weight and a warmer brown. Someone had gone into that bear along the spine, put something inside, and sewn him shut again, and they had done it well enough that only 2 things in the whole palace gave them away: an old nurse's hand plumping a cushion, and a sergeant's nose on a midnight landing. I did not open the seam. I want that on the record, because later it mattered a great deal. I did not tear that bear open in the nursery on the strength of a warm belly and a resewn back, because if I was right, if I was really right, then whatever was inside Barnaby was evidence, and evidence torn out of its place by a frightened man at 9 in the morning, is worth a good deal less than evidence witnessed properly by people whose word a king will take. I had learned that lesson the hard way once, years before, in a matter I do not tell, and I was not going to unlearn it now over a 9-year-old girl. So I did 3 things, quickly and quietly, in that nursery with Orla watching. The first, I found the eye. Not the pale replacement, the other one, the original, the darker glass, set into the mohair on the left side of his face. I looked at it very closely in the window light, closer than I had ever looked at anything. And there at the very center of the black glass, where a maker 30 years ago would have set a small painted highlight to give the bear a spark of life, there was instead a perfect small circle of a different black, not painted, polished. A tiny lens, no bigger than a lentil, seated dead in the heart of that dark glass eye, angled very slightly upward and outward, angled, I realized with a cold that went all the way down, at the head of the little bed, at the pillow, at the exact place where a 9-year-old girl laid her face down every night to sleep. The second thing I did was breathe, once slowly, because a guard who lets his hands shake is no use to anyone. The third thing I did was tell Orla, very quietly, exactly what she was going to do for the rest of that day, and exactly what she was not going to say to anyone, and I watched the fear in her face turn by degrees into something harder and steadier and better than fear. "You put him back," I told her. "Right now the way he was, the same angle, the same slump. You touch nothing else. You air the room and you make the bed and you go about your morning exactly as if this were any morning, because if I am right, then someone is watching this room, and the one thing we cannot let them know is that we know. Can you do that?" Orla looked at the bear in my arms, and then at the little bed with its turned-down linen, and then at me. "For 2 years I've dressed that child and washed that child and sung that child to sleep," she said, and her voice was low and even and did not shake at all. "You tell me what to do to keep her safe, Sergeant, and I'll do it if it costs me my place. What is it? What's in the bear?" I did not want to say it aloud in that room. It felt, absurdly, like saying it would make it more true. But she had earned the truth, and I have never in my life been able to lie to a person who had earned the truth. "It's an eye," I said. "A camera's eye. Someone has put a camera in this child's bear, and they have pointed it at her pillow, and it has been running for at least a week, and I mean to find out who, and I mean to make it stop, and I am going to need you to be braver than you have ever been in your life for about a day and a half. Can you do that?" And Orla, God keep her, set the bear back on the nursery chair with hands as gentle and as steady as if she were laying down the crown itself, arranged him to the exact slump he had held, stepped back, looked at her work and said, "A day and a half. Yes. Now get out of my nursery, Sergeant, before someone wonders why a guard is standing in it, and go do what you have to do." I went, and behind me, on the tall old nursery chair, a battered honey-brown bear sat with his dark glass eye pointed at an empty pillow, watching a room that had, without anyone in it saying a word, just declared war. Now I had a harder problem than finding the camera, and it is the problem that occupied every waking hour of the day and a half I had promised Orla. It was this: a camera does not watch by itself. A camera makes a picture, and the picture goes somewhere and someone looks at it. The lens in the bear's eye was the beginning of a thread, and the far end of that thread was a person in this house, or paid by a person in this house, who had sat in some quiet room and watched a 9-year-old girl sleep, night after night, for reasons I could not begin to guess and did not want to. Finding the lens had taken me 3 nights and a lucky nose. Finding the far end of the thread without being seen to look was going to take everything I had. I began where a soldier begins, which is with what I could see without asking anyone a question. A camera small enough to hide in a bear's eye is a small thing indeed, and small things have small appetites, but they have appetites all the same. It had been warm, running for at least a week. That meant power. A thing that runs a week does not run on a little cell you buy at a chemist's. It runs on something charged, and something charged has to be charged, which meant that at some point on some schedule, someone had to have that bear in their hands and a wire in their fingers, or else there was a line running to it that I had not yet found. And a camera that watches all night in a dark room and produces a picture a watcher can use is not a simple thing either. In the dark, an ordinary lens sees nothing. This one had been pointed at a pillow in a room where the lamp went out at 10. Whoever had built this had built it to see in the dark, which told me two things at once: that they knew their craft and that they were not cheap, and that whoever had paid for it out of the kind of purse that does not flinch. That last thought I put away carefully, because it pointed in a direction I was not yet ready to look. I spent that first day walking my ordinary posts and seeing everything twice. A guard has a great gift if he learns to use it. He is furniture. He stands at doors and at the foot of stairs, and the household walks past him 100 times a day and forgets he is a man with eyes and ears, because a wall does not eavesdrop and a guard is a kind of wall. I had spent 11 years being furniture. Now I used it. I watched who went into the private wing and who came out, and the servants' stairs and the linen route and the back way past the still room. I watched, above all, for anyone who had business near Malin's nursery who had no business being near it. And by the end of that first day, I had seen exactly one thing that did not fit, and it was small, and it was everything. There was a man named Selwyn. He was one of the Queen Consort's household, not a footman, not quite a steward, one of the several soft-handed, capable young men Morwenna had brought with her into the palace and installed in posts that had not existed before she came, and that no one could quite describe. He carried messages. He arranged things. He was pleasant to everyone and known by no one, and he moved through the house with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a man who has never once been asked what he is doing. And on that first day, I watched Selwyn go up the private landing at 4:30 in the afternoon, when Malin was at her music and the nursery was empty, carrying a small flat leather case under his arm, and I watched him come down 11 minutes later without it. 11 minutes, long enough to open a bear along a well-worn seam, change a charged cell for a spent one, and sew him shut again by a skilled hand. Long enough exactly. I did not stop him. I did not follow him. I stood at my post at the foot of the private stair and I was furniture, and Selwyn walked past me close enough that I could have named the cologne he wore, and he did not so much as glance at me, and I let him go, and I marked the whole of it in my memory the way you mark a range card: distances, timings, the leather case, the 11 minutes, the small easy smile of a man who believes himself unwatched. And then I stood there a long while after he had gone, with my heart going hard and slow, because the leather case had changed everything. It meant the thread was short. Do you see it? If Selwyn came to service the camera himself, in person, carrying the parts under his arm, then whoever he answered to was close. A great and cautious schemer, sitting far off and safe, does not send a personal man of her own household up a palace stair in daylight to tend a machine hidden in a child's toy. She uses layers. She uses people who use people. The fact that Selwyn did it himself, and did it in the Queen Consort's livery, in the Queen Consort's own wing of the house, meant that the person he answered to was not being careful, because the person he answered to did not believe they had anything to be careful of. They believed they held every key that mattered. They believed no one would ever look inside the bear. I knew, standing at the foot of that stair, whose man Selwyn was. Every soul in the palace knew whose man Selwyn was. But knowing a thing in your gut and being able to lay it before the king are two different countries, and the ground between them is where good men are broken. I had a nurse's word about a warm bear, and my own nose, and 11 minutes of a smiling man with a leather case. I did not have the one thing that would make a king rise from his chair. I did not have what was on the pictures. I did not know what the eye had seen, or why anyone would want to see it, and until I did, I had a suspicion and not a case, and a suspicion is a rope of sand. So that night I did the second reckless thing in this story, and unlike the first, The night I talked myself out of the smell, I have never regretted it. I went to find Torin. Prince Torin was Malin's brother, 11 years old, and where Malin was grave and quiet, Torin was quick and loud and forever in trouble of the harmless kind, and he had a passion that the household regarded as a nuisance, and that I had come, that week, to regard as a gift from heaven. Torin loved machines. He took clocks apart. He had built a wireless set from a kit and a book and driven his tutors mad tapping messages to no one. He knew more about current and cells and lenses than any grown soul in that palace save the electricians, and he was 11, which meant two things: that he could keep a secret if you made it a matter of honor, and that no one would think twice about a guard exchanging a few words with a boy about a broken clock. I found him after supper in the long gallery, winding a music box he had already taken apart and put back together twice, and I sat down beside him on the window seat, which a guard does not do, and I said, quietly, that I needed the help of the only person in the palace clever enough to give it, and that it concerned his sister, and that it was a secret of the gravest kind, and that if he took it up, he would have to be braver and more careful than he had ever been in his life. I watched the boy go very still. I watched the child in him give way to something older and steadier, the same turn I had watched happen in Orla's face that morning, and I understood, not for the first time, that children know far better than we credit them when a thing has stopped being a game. "Is Malin all right?" was the first thing he asked. Not what is it, not what do I get, not why me. Is Malin all right? I could have embraced him for it. "She's all right now," I said, "and I mean to keep her that way, and I can't do it without you. But you have to swear to me, Torin, on your grandmother's memory, that whatever I tell you and whatever we do, you tell no one, not your tutor, not your mother, not a friend, not Malin herself, until I say it's safe. This is not a game and it is not an adventure, and if you treat it like one, someone we love could be hurt. Do you understand me?" "On grandmother's memory," he said, and held out his hand, and I shook a boy's hand as gravely as I have ever shaken any man's, and that was the whole of the swearing, and he kept it to the letter, which is more than I can say for a good many grown men I have known. Then I told him about the eye. Not everything, not the lentil of lens in the dark glass, not yet, because I wanted to see whether he would arrive at it himself. I told him that there might be a small machine hidden somewhere that made pictures in the dark and sent them somewhere, and I asked him, as if it were a puzzle, how a clever person would send a picture across a house without a wire running down the corridor for anyone to trip over. Torin's eyes lit the way a boy's eyes light only for the thing he was made to love. "You wouldn't run a wire," he said, contemptuous of the very idea. "You'd send it through the air. Like my wireless set, like the tapping, only pictures instead of taps. There's little sets that do it now. You need a sender in the room and a catcher somewhere near, not far. They're weak, the little ones, they can't shout across a whole palace. The catcher has to be close. Same floor, maybe. Next wall, even, close." He frowned, the puzzle turning in him. "Why, Sergeant, why are you asking me this? What room?" And there it was, close, the word I needed, delivered by an 11-year-old in a window seat, the single fact that turned my rope of sand into something I could climb. The watcher was near. The far end of the thread was not off in some safe, distant chamber. It was on the private landing, or the wall behind it, or the floor above, within a stone's throw of the sleeping child it spied on. All I had to do was find a room that had no reason to hold a machine and was holding one anyway. I did not answer Torin's question yet. I told him instead that I needed him to build me something, and I told him what, and the boy listened and grinned, and for the first time all evening looked exactly his age, delighted and terrified in equal measure, a soldier's grandson enlisted in the first real campaign of his life. What I had asked Torin to build was a sniffer. He had explained it to me faster than I could follow, the way clever children do, all of it obvious to him and none of it to me, but the shape of the thing I understood well enough. A sender that throws a picture through the air throws it whether or not anyone is close by to catch it. It is always shouting, quietly, into the dark. and a shout, however quiet, can be heard by the right kind of ear. Torin could build, out of his wireless kit and a coil, and a little needle dial that twitched when it caught a signal, a device the size of a cigar box that would grow more restless the nearer it came to the shouting. It would not tell me what the picture was. It would only tell me where the sender was, and once I stood near enough that both the bear and the sniffer were shouting and catching at full strength, it would help me walk toward the catcher, the far end, the room where the watcher's machine sat drinking in everything the eye saw. It won't be pretty, Torin warned me, already gathering parts in his mind. And I'll need till tomorrow night, and you can't let anyone see me building it or they'll ask what it's for. Tomorrow night, I said. It was inside the day and a half I had promised Orla barely. Build it in your own room and tell your tutor you're making a music box. Tell him anything. Just build it. He built it. I will not pretend the next 30 hours were easy. They were the hardest of my service, and I had served in places I do not name. The difficulty was not danger. It was that I had to go on being furniture, stand my ordinary posts, exchange my ordinary 2 words with the household, salute the Queen Consort's people as they passed, and give no single sign that anything under that roof had changed. Twice in that day and a half I passed Selwyn in a corridor, and twice I gave him the small nod a sergeant gives, and twice he smiled his easy smile and went on his way, and both times I wanted, with a violence that frightened me, to put him against the wall and ask him what he thought he was doing pointing a machine at a sleeping child. I did neither. Furniture does not grab. I let him pass, and I marked where he went, and I waited. And there was Malin herself to think of, which was the worst of it. Because here is the cruelty of what I had chosen. To catch the watcher, I had to leave the eye watching. I had to let that child go on sleeping under a lens for another 2 nights, because the moment I removed the bear or covered the eye, the watcher would know they were discovered, and the whole thread would go dark, and I would be left with a nurse's word and a warm bear and nothing, and Selwyn would smile his way out of the palace, and whoever had sent him would deny everything, and the machine would simply move to somewhere I could not find it, and the child would be no safer than before, less safe. Because now her one guardian would be known to the enemy and posted, no doubt, somewhere very far from her door. I understood this coldly, and I hated it wholly. Every night of those 2 nights, I walked the landing at the turn of the hour and stood outside her door and heard, once, the small sound of a child turning in her sleep, and I made myself walk on, and I have never in my life stood a harder watch than the watch where the only way to protect the innocent was to leave the wrong in place one more night and let it run. I told myself she was safe, and she was. That is the thing I have had to hold on to in the years since, and it is true. The eye only watched. She slept and woke and went to her lessons and never knew and would not know until it was long over and safely won. The harm was not to her body but to something harder to name, the sanctity of a child's own room, the one place in all the world where a person, however small, is meant to be wholly unwatched. Someone had set a stranger's eye at the heart of it, and though Malin slept sound, I knew, and I could not stop feeling that every hour the eye ran was an hour of a theft I was permitting for the sake of catching the thief. I made my peace with it the only way a soldier can. The fastest road to stopping it forever ran straight through catching whoever had done it, and I ran down that road as fast as I dared and no faster, because Sloppy would lose the child everything. On the second night, Torin gave me the box. He gave it to me in the long gallery again, wrapped in a jersey so it looked like nothing, and his hands were not quite steady, and I saw that the 2 days had cost him 2, that he had lain awake in his own bed down the same landing, knowing what I knew, keeping the promise, growing up faster than any boy should have to. "It works," he whispered. "I tested it on my own wireless. The needle jumps when you get close and it goes wild when you're right on top of it. But Sergeant," he caught my sleeve. The sender in Malin's room, I could feel it. Standing in the gallery holding the box, I could feel it shouting, "It's strong. Whoever put it there, they didn't buy it in a shop. It's good. It's proper good." Who has money for proper good? I looked at that clever, frightened boy, and I did not answer, because he had already answered it himself, and we both knew whose wing of the palace we stood in, and whose man carried a leather case up the private stair, and whose purse did not flinch at the cost of a thing that could see in the dark. Go to bed, I told him gently. You've done a soldier's work tonight, and better than most soldiers. The rest is mine. If I've done right by you, you'll never have to touch this again. And one day when you're grown, I'll tell you the whole of it and buy you a drink, and you can tell me everything I got wrong about the wireless. Go on. He went, looking back once at the door, and I took the box wrapped in its jersey, and I went a hunt. It had to be that night. The next morning my day and a half ran out, and beyond that I could not answer for what would happen. Selwyn might come with his leather case, or the watcher might grow bored, or 100 things might change, and every changed thing was a thing that could lose me the thread. So at the turn of 2 in the morning, when the private wing lay dark and silent, and the only souls awake in it were the sleeping child, the dozing nurse, and me, I came up onto the private landing with a boy's cigar box hidden under my coat, and I began, for the second time in this story, to walk toward a thing I did not want to find. I stood first outside Malin's door and let the needle wake. Torin had been right. Even through the door I felt the box grow restless in my hand, the little needle stirring, the sender inside the bear shouting its quiet shout into the dark for whoever was catching it. Good. That was my beacon. Now I had to find the ear that heard it. I walked the landing slow, holding the box level, watching the needle. Away from Malin's door it settled. That told me the catcher was not further along the landing. I came back and stood at her door with the needle high, and then I turned and faced the inner wall of the corridor, the wall that backed onto the row of small rooms the household kept for linen, for the nurse's off-duty use, for storage, the unregarded plumbing of a great house, and I took one step toward that wall, and the needle did not fall. It rose. I want to tell you what that felt like. Standing alone in a dark corridor at 2 in the morning, with a boy's homemade box trembling in my hand, and the needle climbing as I faced a wall of rooms that should have held nothing but folded sheets. It felt like the moment in a hunt when the trail you have followed on faith and guesswork suddenly hardens under your feet into a true clear path, and you know, not hope, no, that the thing you seek is at the end of it. The catcher was through that wall. Not far off, not in some distant safe chamber. 10 feet from the sleeping child, behind the linen rooms, in the plumbing of the house, someone had put a machine that drank in everything the eye saw. And I was going to walk the last 10 feet of the thread and put my hand on it before the sun came up. I moved down the row of doors, holding the box, and the needle told me the story door by door. The linen room, it settled. The nurse's day room, settled. The old box room at the end, the one the household used for the broken furniture and the boxes no one would ever open again, the one with the door that was always locked and the key that hung, I happen to know, on the Queen Consort's chamberlain's ring and no one else's. The needle went wild. I stood before that locked door with the box shaking against my ribs, and I made myself think, because a man who stops thinking at the moment of discovery is a man about to ruin everything he has built. The door was locked. The key was on the chamberlain's ring. I could not pick it. I am a soldier, not a housebreaker, and I would not force it, because a forced door announces itself, and the whole of my craft that week had been in not being announced. If I broke into that box room at 2 in the morning and stood over the machine, and the watcher came in the morning and found the door sprung and the room disturbed, then everything went dark, exactly as if I had torn the bear open in the nursery. Worse, a forced door with nothing else proven made me the criminal. A sergeant found in a broken room in the Queen Consort's wing, with a strange homemade box in his hands, would be in a cell by breakfast, and the machine would be gone by noon, and no one would ever again get near enough to the truth to touch it. So I did not break the door. I did the thing that was harder and slower and right. I marked the room. I stood before it long enough to be certain, walking the needle up and down the row twice more, confirming that this door and only this door drove it mad. And then I went back down the landing and stood my post as if nothing in the world had happened, and I let the night pass over me, and I waited for morning, and for the one person under that roof whose word could open any door in the palace and whose spine I had come, in 11 years of standing behind him, to trust more than my own. I was going to the Crown Prince. Let me tell you about Prince Rowan, because everything that came after ran through him. Rowan was King Alaric's son and heir, a man of perhaps 35 in those days, and he was not what the household expected an heir to be. He was quiet where his rank invited noise. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke it was short and plain and meant exactly what it said. He had a soldier's regard for evidence and a judge's patience for it, and this is the part that mattered. He was the father, in all but the strict letter, that Malin and Torrin had lacked since illness took their own from them young. He was their uncle by blood and their guardian in truth. He walked Malin to her lessons some mornings himself. He had sat with Torrin over the wireless set and pretended kindly to understand less than he did so the boy could teach him. He loved those children with the fierce, quiet steadiness of a man who had decided they would not grow up feeling unprotected, and he had made himself their wall. And he had no love at all for the Queen Consort. That was the open secret of the house, the fault line under everything. Morwenna was the king's second wife, come into the palace in the gray years after Queen Isolde died, and she had brought her own son Cassius and her own soft-handed household and her own cold way of arranging things, and she had in the years since been steadily and patiently gathering into her hands every thread of the household she could reach, the keys, the appointments, the small daily powers that add up in a great house to control. Rowan had watched her do it with the level, unhurried attention he gave to everything, and he had never once moved against her because the king loved her or had chosen her, or was too grieved and gray to see her clearly, and a good heir does not war on his father's wife on suspicion. But he had watched. He had kept his own counsel and his own guard around the children, and he had waited, I think, for the day she reached one thread too far, and I was about to walk into his study and tell him that she had reached, at last, all the way into the nursery, into the very bear on the child's chair, and that I could prove it if he would open one locked door. I came to him at 8 in the morning before the household stirred, and I asked for a private word, and he gave it, and I told him everything. I told it plainly and in order the way you report to an officer the smell of hot dust, the warm bear, the lens in the dark glass eye, Selwyn and the leather case in the 11 minutes, Torrin's box, the wild needle at the locked box-room door whose key hung on Morwenna's chamberlain's ring. I did not editorialize. I did not accuse. I laid it out like a range card and let it speak, and I watched the Crown Prince of the realm go very still and very pale, and then very quiet, in the particular way of a man holding a terrible anger on a short chain, because he knows that the anger is not yet his to spend. When I had finished, he was silent a long moment. Then he asked me 3 questions, and they were the right 3, and they told me I had brought this to the right man. Is my niece safe at this moment? Yes, sir, she's at her lessons. The eye only watches, it's done her no hurt she can feel, and she knows nothing. I've kept it running on purpose to keep the thread from going dark before we could follow it. I don't like it, but she's safe. You haven't opened the room? No, sir. I've touched nothing that would tell them we know. The room's exactly as they left it. If you open that door with the chamberlain and a witness or 2 whose word the king will take, you'll find it as they left it. And no one can say a soldier planted anything or forced anything or dreamed anything. It'll be whatever it is, with clean hands all round. Rowan looked at me for a long moment when I said that, and something in his face shifted, and I understood that he had been braced, without quite knowing it, for me to have overstepped, to have broken in, or torn the bear apart, or done some hot-blooded, honest thing that a clever enemy could use to turn the whole matter inside out and make the guardian into the criminal. That I had not, that I had left the wrong in place and my hands clean, and the evidence whole for exactly the reason he would have chosen himself, was the thing that decided him. I have thought since that if I had broken that door, he could not have backed me, however much he wanted to, because he would have had nothing to stand on but a broken door and my word. Because I had held my hand, he had everything. His third question was the shortest. Who else knows? The nurse, Orla, Prince Torin, no one else. Both sworn to silence, and both have kept it 2 days without a crack. And now you, sir. He nodded slowly. And then Prince Rowan did a thing I did not expect, which was to stand up from behind his desk and cross the room and put his hand on my shoulder. Not the clap on the back that great men give to servants they mean to reward, but the flat, steady grip one soldier gives another before a hard thing. And he said, "Lo, you smelled hot dust on a landing, and you did not talk yourself out of it, and you did not break, and you did not run to me with half of it and no proof, and let her lawyers make a fool of us both. You brought me the whole of it clean. Sergeant, when this is finished, remind me to tell you what that is worth. Not now. Now we open the room, come." And I would have followed that man into anything, and I did. Here is where the day turned, and where I first learned that a thing you have built carefully and well can still go wrong in a heartbeat, because the enemy is not a fool either. Rowan did not go to the king. Not yet, and he was right not to, though I did not fully see why until later. To go to the king first, with a suspicion and a locked door, was to hand Morwenna a day's warning, while the household summoned the chamberlain and the witnesses, and the fuss of it rippled through the corridors. To go to the king first was to give the smiling Selwyn 11 quiet minutes to come up the stair with his leather case and empty that box room to bare walls. No. Rowan meant to open the door now, this morning, fast and quiet, with the 2 men in all the palace whose word even Morwenna could not overturn, and then, with whatever was inside laid bare and witnessed, to take the whole of it to his father with nothing left to argue about. He sent for the chamberlain, Morwenna's own chamberlain, the very man whose ring held the key, because the key was the fastest way in, and because a door opened by the enemy's own keyholder cannot later be called a forced door. That was the gamble. It was a good gamble, and it very nearly cost us everything, because the chamberlain, a narrow, cautious man named Pell who had served Morwenna since before she came to the palace, took one look at the Crown Prince standing at the door of the box room asking for the key, and understood in a heartbeat what only a guilty household understands so fast, that the game was up. And Pell was quicker than any of us. "Of course, your highness," he said smoothly, reaching for his ring, and then his hand, instead of finding the key, found nothing, and he made a small show of it, patting his coat, frowning. "Forgive me. I don't seem the box room key. I keep it separate in my own room, it's so rarely wanted. A moment and I'll fetch it." And he bowed and turned and walked away down the corridor at exactly the pace of a man who is not hurrying, and I watched him go, and I knew, the way I had known about the smell, that he was not going to fetch a key. He was going to warn her. Every step was carrying him toward the Queen Consort's apartments, and the moment he reached her the machine in that room would begin, somehow, to vanish, and my 2 days of clean, careful work would burn to nothing in the time it takes a frightened man to whisper, "We are discovered." I looked at Prince Rowan, and Prince Rowan looked at me, and in that one glance we understood each other completely, and he gave me the order without a word, a small tip of his head toward the retreating chamberlain that meant, "Do not let that door be emptied," and I moved. I did not chase Pell. Chasing Pell was the mistake, and I saw it in the half-second I had to see anything. If I ran him down and seized him, I would have an assaulted chamberlain and a crown prince standing at a still-locked door, and Morwenna's people would have all the argument they needed. No, the chamberlain could go. The chamberlain could warn whoever he liked. What mattered was that when the warning arrived, the room was already ours, sealed, guarded, and beyond the reach of any hand that came to empty it. The race was not to stop the message. The race was to reach the door first with the authority to hold it. And I had that authority now. because the heir to the realm was standing 3 feet away and had just, wordlessly, given me his voice. "Sir," I said low and fast, "I need your word to hold this door against anyone in the king's name, and I need it out loud now in front of a witness." There was a second guard at the end of the corridor, young Aldous on the morning watch, a good steady lad. I raised my voice just enough to carry to him. "Guardsman Aldous." "To me." Rowan understood at once, and God bless him, he did not hesitate, did not stand on the caution of a man who wants more proof before he commits. He had made his decision back in the study with his hand on my shoulder, and a man like Rowan, once decided, does not decide twice. He said, in a voice pitched to carry down the whole corridor and to be remembered exactly by everyone who heard it, "By the authority of the Crown, this room is sealed as of this moment. No person enters or leaves, and nothing is removed from it, save by my hand or the king's, until it is opened before proper witnesses. Sergeant Halloway, Guardsman Aldous, you hold this door on my order and answer to me alone. Anyone who attempts that door, of whatever rank or household, you refuse. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir," said Aldous, arriving at a run and taking his place at the door with a snap that would have done a parade ground proud, and understanding, I could see, not one word of what this was about, and not needing to, because his prince had given a plain order, and a guard's whole trade is the keeping of plain orders. And so when they came, and they came within the quarter hour, exactly as I had known they would, they found the door already held. Selwyn came first. Of course it was Selwyn. He came up the corridor with the smooth, unhurried confidence I had watched for 2 days, and under his arm, this time, was not the small flat leather case, but a larger canvas hold-all, the kind of bag a man brings when he means to carry something away. And I understood that Pell's warning had reached its mark, and the scheme had moved instantly to its last resort, which was to strip the room bare and carry the machine out of the palace before anyone with the right to look could look. He came to the door and found 2 guards across it and the Crown Prince standing beside them, and for the first time in 2 days I saw Selwyn's easy smile falter. "Your Highness," he said, recovering it, bowing, "I've come to clear out the old box room. Her Majesty the Queen Consort wishes it turned out such a clutter, all that broken furniture. If your men would stand aside, I'll only be a few minutes." "The room is sealed," said Rowan pleasantly, and did not move. "Sealed, sir, by whose?" "Mine, and it stays sealed. You may tell the Queen Consort that if she wishes the box room turned out, it will be turned out this morning before witnesses by my hand, with her present if she chooses to attend. She is welcome. Everyone is welcome. That is rather the point." Rowan's voice never rose and never hardened, and it was the most frightening thing I ever heard a man say, because there was nothing in it a guilty person could grip. "You may put down the bag, Selwyn. You won't be needing it. And you will not be leaving this corridor until the room is opened, so make yourself comfortable. Sergeant, Master Selwyn will wait with us." I have never seen a man's face do what Selwyn's face did in that moment. The smooth confidence draining out of it, by degrees, as he understood that there was no version of the next hour in which he walked out of this corridor a free and unremarked man, that the room he had come to empty was going to be opened whether he liked it or no, and that he was going to be standing there when it happened. He looked for one wild instant back down the corridor the way he had come, and I stepped 1 step, the smallest movement a man can make, so that my body was between Selwyn and the corridor's mouth, and he understood that too. He put down the bag. He stood against the wall where I could see him, and we waited for the king. Because that was Rowan's last and best decision, and the one that turned a household intrigue into justice. He did not open the room himself. He held it, sealed and witnessed, and he sent openly, in the sight of everyone, for his father. If the box room was to be opened, it would be opened before the king of the realm, so that whatever was inside could never afterward be doubted, dismissed, or arranged away. He would not give Morwenna the smallest crack of the air moved against his father's wife in secret. He would open the door in the sunlight. in front of the one man whose judgment closed every argument, and let the room speak for itself to the king's own face. King Alaric Tame. I had seen the king many times in 11 years, at ceremonies, at reviews, passing in corridors, but I had never before been 3 feet from him at a moment that mattered, and I will tell you that grief had aged him and rank had not softened him, and that when he came down that corridor with his gray head high and his eyes hard, having been told by his son only that there was a matter touching the safety of his grandchildren that he must see with his own eyes and judge. The whole corridor seemed to draw its breath and hold it. Behind him, because she had insisted, because she could not do otherwise without confessing by her absence, came the Queen Consort Morwenna, and her chamberlain Pell white-faced at her shoulder, and behind them a scatter of the household drawn by the gathering weight of the thing, and among them, arriving quietly and taking a place near me with a steadiness beyond his years, Prince Torin, who had promised to tell no one and had kept it, and who had come now because he had earned, more than anyone, the right to see the end. The king looked at the sealed door, he looked at his son, he looked briefly and without warmth at his wife. Then he said, "Open it." And Pell the chamberlain produced the key, the very key he had claimed to have left in his room, and its sudden reappearance in his shaking hand was itself a small confession that everyone present marked, and with the king's own eyes upon him, he unlocked the box-room door, and Rowan pushed it wide, and we all of us looked into the little cluttered room where the household kept its broken things, and there, set upon an old writing table that someone had cleared and dusted amid the dust of everything else, plugged into the wall and blinking its small green light, humming faintly, warm, I could smell it from the door, the hot dust, the smell that had started all of this on a midnight landing, sat the machine. It was not large. It was a neat black box with a glass face and a spool of some kind turning slowly inside it, and a coil of fine wire rising from its back, and beside it, stacked in a careful tidy row, were the little cartridges it fed on, a dozen of them more, each one labeled in a small precise hand with a date, 2 weeks of dates, 2 weeks of nights. And on the glass face of the machine, playing even now to an empty room because no one had thought to stop it in the panic, was a picture. Grainy, greenish, the ghostly gray light of a thing that sees in the dark, and in the picture, seen from above and to the side, exactly the angle of a bear's dark glass eye set on a nursery chair, was a small bed, and turned-down linen, and the shape of a sleeping child. No one in that corridor spoke. The king of the realm stood in the doorway of a box-room and looked at a machine that had been watching his granddaughter sleep for 2 weeks, and I watched the color leave his face and something terrible come into it. And beside me, I heard Torin make a small sound, quickly stifled, and I put my hand on the boy's shoulder without looking at him and gripped, hard, the grip that says hold, hold. It is almost over. We have won, hold. It was Rowan who broke the silence, and he did not break it toward the machine. He turned. He turned all the way around slowly in that crowded corridor, and he looked past his father, and past the white-faced chamberlain, and he fixed his quiet level eyes on the Queen Consort Morwenna, and he asked her one question in a voice that carried to the last soul in that corridor and beyond. "Whose is this?" The Queen Consort Morwenna was not a fool, and I had never made the mistake of thinking her one. She had been arranging things in that palace for years, and a woman who arranges things knows how to meet a bad moment, and I watched her meet this one with a composure that would have been admirable in a better cause. She did not blanch. She did not flee. She lifted her chin and she looked at the machine and then at the Crown Prince, and she said, in a voice of cool, bewildered offense, "How should I know? It is a storeroom, Rowan. Any number of people have keys to the household rooms. If some servant has been playing at spying, then by all means find him and dismiss him. But I fail to see why you have dragged the king through the corridors and made a spectacle to lay a footman's mischief at my door." It was well done. It was very well done, and if the corridor had held only the machine and the pictures, it might even have worked, for the machine, for all its horror, named no one. A machine cannot say who bought it. A picture cannot say who watched it. She could stand there and be outraged at the wickedness of persons unknown, and demand the culprit be found among the servants, and there was, in that moment, no line of thread that ran visibly from the black box on the writing table to the woman in the corridor. She had built it that way. Layers. Selwyn served the chamberlain, and the chamberlain served her, and each link could be broken and disowned, and the machine sat in a room whose key any number of hands had touched, and she had left herself, as such people always leave themselves, a clean road to walk away. But she had made one mistake, and Rowan had already found it, and he did not raise his voice to spring it. "You're right," he said mildly to Morwenna. "A machine names no one, a picture names no one. Any number of people have keys." He let that sit a moment. "So let us not ask the machine, let us ask the man who fed it." And he turned, unhurried, to Selwyn, who stood against the wall between me and the corridor's mouth with his hold all at his feet and his easy smile long gone. "Master Selwyn came up this corridor a quarter of an hour ago with an empty bag to clear this room out, before the king was sent for, before it was opened, before anyone but a very few could have known there was anything in it to clear. Master Selwyn has been seen, by the sergeant here, going up to the nursery landing with a small leather case, and coming down without it on more than one afternoon, when the princess was at her lessons. Master Selwyn's hands, I should think, will match the thread that rescued the bear's back, if a seamstress is asked to look. Master Selwyn is going to tell us now whose errand he was running when he did these things, because Master Selwyn is a clever man, and a clever man knows the difference between the person who carried the machine and the person who ordered it carried, and knows which of those two the king's justice falls hardest upon, and knows that there is only one way for the man who carried it to lighten the weight that is about to land on him." Rowan's voice never rose. "Tell the truth, Selwyn, all of it now, while it can still do you some good, or carry the whole of this alone. Choose quickly. The king is waiting. I have seen brave men and I have seen frightened men, and I will tell you that Selwyn was not brave, and that the calculation ran across his face like a shadow across water, and that it did not take him long. He was, as Rowan had said, a clever man, and a clever man does not go to the block for a mistress who has already in the first minute called him, some servant playing at spying, and hung him out to be dismissed alone. He had heard her disown him. We had all heard her disown him. And so Selwyn, who had smiled at me in corridors for 2 days, looked at the floor and then at the king, and then, with something like relief, the relief of a man setting down a weight he had carried too far, he told the truth. He had been placed in the nursery wing by the chamberlain Pell. The machine had been bought abroad, through a merchant who asked no questions, and paid for out of a private purse to which Pell held the strings and Pell alone. The bear had been taken to a seamstress in the town, Selwyn gave her name, which was later found, and she confirmed the whole of it. A woman told only that she was mending a lining and repairing an old toy for the household, who had sewn the little machine's eye into the glass and the cartridge holder into the belly for a fee and no explanation, and who had wept when they came to her, to learn what she had helped to make. And the errand, the placing of it, the tending of it, the changing of the cartridges every few days, and carrying the full ones back down the private stair in the little leather case. That errand had been given to Selwyn by Pell, and Pell had said, when Selwyn once asked why, that it was Her Majesty's own wish, and not to be questioned, and that a man who tended it faithfully would rise, and a man who spoke of it would fall. Her Majesty's own wish, Rowan repeated into the silence. "That's what the chamberlain told me, Your Highness," said Selwyn low. "On my life, that's what he told me. Ask him." And every eye in the corridor turned to the chamberlain Pell. I have wondered since whether Pell might have held. Whether, if he had been a stronger man, he might have taken the whole weight onto himself as the price of his mistress's protection and gone to his ruin with his mouth shut, and left her, once again, a clean road to walk away, disowning her chamberlain as she had disowned her servant. It is possible. Loyalty of that kind exists, even in bad causes. But Pell was not that man. Pell was a narrow, cautious, self-preserving man who had panicked at the box-room door and pretended to lose a key. And a man who panics at the first push is not a man who stands at the last. And when the king of the realm turned his hard, gray, grief-worn eyes upon him and said, very quietly, "You will tell me now on your oath, and you will tell me the truth, whether you did this thing on your own account or on the word of another, and if on another's word, whose?" When the king said that, the Chamberlain Pell looked once at the Queen Consort, one long, desperate look that begged her to save him, and found nothing in her face but the cold calculation of a woman already 3 moves into deciding how to survive without him. And he broke. "I did nothing but obey," Pell said, and his voice cracked on it. "Everything, the machine, the seamstress, the purse, everything by Her Majesty's own instruction, given to me in her own room in her own words. She said," he stopped. He could not look at her now. "She said the child was too much loved. She said the household loved those children more than they loved her, and that a woman must know what is said of her behind her back and in the room she isn't in, and that the nursery was where they'd say it, the nurse, the boy, the Crown Prince, when he came to sit with them of an evening. She wanted to hear what was said of her when the doors were shut. She wanted," his voice failed entirely for a moment, then found itself, small and wretched. "She wanted a hold. Something to know about all of them that they didn't know she knew. That's what she said to me. Those were her words. God forgive me, I only obeyed." And so it came out, the whole ugly small shape of it, there in the corridor before the king. It had not been in the end the monstrous thing the imagination reaches for when it hears the word camera and the word child in one breath, and I have thanked God on my knees for that, more times than I can count. It was, in its way, worse for being so petty. Morwenna had not meant the child harm. She had meant the child nothing at all. Malin's nursery had simply been convenient. The one warm room in a cold house where the people who loved those children gathered of an evening and spoke freely. The nurse and the boy and the Crown Prince, in the belief that a child's room is a safe room, that no one listens where a little girl sleeps. And so the Queen Consort had chosen that room precisely because it was safe, precisely because a bear on a nursery chair is the last thing on earth anyone thinks to distrust, and she had set her stranger's eye at the heart of the one sanctuary in that house, not to hurt the child, but to spy through her, to use her sleeping face as the cover for an ear pressed to the wall of everyone she feared. She had made a 9-year-old's bear into an instrument of her own suspicion. And in doing it she had reached, at long last, the one thread too far that Rowan had waited years to see her reach. Now the Crown Prince turned to face her fully, and this was the confrontation the whole day had been building toward, and I stood 4 feet from it, and I will carry every word of it to my grave. "Say it isn't true," Rowan said to her, quietly, almost gently. "You've heard your chamberlain and you've heard your servant. Say they've both lied, both of them on their oaths in front of the king. Say it was some enemy of yours who bought a machine and forged your orders and sewed your suspicions into a child's toy to bring you down. Say it, Morwenna, if you can, and my father will hear it, and we will send for the merchant and the seamstress and the purse book, and we will test every word of it to the ground, and God help you if one thread of your telling phrase." And here at last something entered his voice, not loudness, but a depth, the low current of a man who has held an anger on a chain for years, and has been given, finally, the right to let it stand up to its full height. "Or tell my father the truth, and let him judge you, and spare this house the spectacle of a Queen Consort tried on the word of her own servants for what she did to a sleeping child." She did not say it wasn't true. That was the thing that finished her, and she knew it was the thing that finished her, and she did it anyway, because whatever else Morwenna was, she was not, in that last moment, going to stand in front of the king she had lied to for years, and add one more lie that a summoned merchant and a weeping seamstress would tear to shreds within the day. She was too clever for that. She saw the trap in it, that a fresh lie disproved would take from her the last thing she had, which was the king's willingness to believe he had not been utterly deceived in her. And so she chose, coldly, the only ground left to her, which was to make it small. "It watched," she said. "It didn't touch her. It didn't harm a hair of her head, and no one can say it did. She slept and she woke and she never knew, and she is exactly as safe and whole this morning as she was 2 weeks ago. I made a machine that listened to a room. That is all. You would think from your faces that I had—" She stopped. Even she would not finish that sentence. It was information. It was the ordinary caution of a woman in a house full of people who despise her. If any one of you had my enemies, you would have done the same and worse and called it prudence. "You put a stranger's eye in her bear," said Rowan, and his quiet had teeth in it now. "You made the one thing that comforts her into the thing that watched her. You chose her room because it was the room no one would ever suspect, because a child's sleep is sacred, and you knew it was sacred, and you used the sacredness of it as your cover. Do not stand in front of my father and tell me it did her no harm. You have not the smallest idea what you've done, because you have never once in your life stood in a room and imagined how it feels to be small and to trust wholly that where you sleep is safe. She trusted that. Every child alive trusts that. It is the first thing we owe them and the last thing we should ever take, and you took it and dressed the theft up as prudence, and you'd take it again tomorrow if it served you. That is what you've done, not to her body, to the thing underneath it that we are supposed to guard." And into that silence the king spoke, and everyone in the corridor turned to him, because it was his to end, and we all of us knew it. King Alaric had said not one word through the whole of the telling. He had stood in the doorway of the box room and watched the pictures play and heard his chamberlain break and heard his son's cold grief, and he had held his own counsel behind that hard gray face. And now he stepped forward past his son, and he looked at his wife for a long, long moment, and what was in his face was not rage. It was worse than rage. It was the look of a man who has, in a single morning, finished a slow, reluctant sum he has been refusing to add up for years. Every cold arrangement, every gathered key, every warmth that had gone out of his house since she entered it, and has arrived at last, against all his own wishing, at a total he can no longer pretend away. "You did this," he said, not a question, "in my house to Alara's daughter, my granddaughter. You set a machine to watch her sleep." He did not raise his voice, and it was the more terrible for it. "I have been a grieving man, Morwenna, and a grieving man is an easy man to lead, and you led me, and I let you because it was easier than looking. I am done being led. I am looking now." He turned his head slowly and took in the whole corridor, the machine, the pictures, the broken chamberlain, the disowned servant, his white son, the boy Torrin standing straight and pale by my side, and me. "And I find I have let a great deal go on under my own roof that I will spend the rest of my life ashamed I did not see. But I see this. There is no purse deep enough and no marriage old enough and no grief great enough to make me not see this." "Rowan." "Sir," said the Crown Prince, "you have the conduct of this, all of it. You will do what is right, and you will do it in the open, and you will not spare her because she is my wife, nor spare me because I am your father and a fool. Whatever the law and the honor of this house require, you will require it. I will sign it, every word." He looked once more at Morwenna, and something in his face closed, finally and forever, like a door. "You will not go near those children again. You will not be in a room with them. From this hour you are a stranger to my grandchildren, and you have made yourself so with your own hands, and I will not lift one finger to soften it. Take her from here." They took her from there. I will not dress up what followed with more drama than it held, because the truth is that the great confrontations of this world are loud, and the justice that follows them is quiet, and the quiet is where the real work is done. Let me tell you how it ended, all of it, thread by thread, because I promised you at the start that I would carry the whole of this, and I do not mean to set down half of it and call it done. The machine and its cartridges and the little leather case were taken up by Prince Rowan's own hand, before the king and the household as witnesses, and sealed, and set into the keeping of the king's justiciar, the realm's high officer of law, a grave, incorruptible old man named Lord Ansel, who had served 3 sovereigns and could not be reached by any purse in the kingdom. Every cartridge was examined in the presence of witnesses, by people whose only care was the truth, and I am glad to say, glad past the telling of it, that what they found on those 2 weeks of nights was, in the end, a mercy. The eye had watched an empty room and a sleeping child, and in the evenings, the ordinary tender business of a family, a nurse singing, a boy showing his sister a clockwork toy, a crown prince reading aloud in a low voice until a small girl's eyes closed. Nothing shameful, nothing that could be used. The hold Morwenna had reached for did not exist, because the people she spied on had nothing in them but love for those children, and love makes a poor lever. Her whole cold scheme had gathered, in the end, only proof of exactly the thing she could not understand and could not forgive. That the house loved the children, and had nothing to hide in loving them, and that she had spent 2 weeks and a small fortune to photograph a warmth she would never be part of. The seamstress was found and questioned gently and believed she had been deceived like everyone else, told she was mending a lining, and her weeping when she learned the truth was judged honest, and she was let go with no stain, and I am told Princess Alara sent her, later and privately, a kindness, for the grief the woman carried at having been used so. Selwyn, who had carried the machine but not conceived it, and who had told the whole truth when telling it could still do some good, was dismissed from the household without character and put out of the palace, and forbidden its precincts, and that was the whole of what fell on him, and it was enough. A man who trades his conscience for the promise that he will rise, and finds instead that he falls, has been taught the only lesson the world had for him. The Chamberlain Pell, who had bought the machine and hired the seamstress and given the orders and then broken at the first hard question, was handed to Lord Ansell's justice, and the law took its course with him, and he answered for what he had done to the full measure the law required, and I will not pretend I was sorry. A man who will do a thing like that to a child on another's word and defend it as obedience has decided somewhere along the way that his own soul is a thing he keeps in another person's pocket, and the world is right to make him carry the weight he tried to set down on his mistress. And Morwenna. The Queen Consort's reckoning was the slowest and the largest. The king could not make of it a public spectacle. A realm does not put its own consort in the dock without shaking the throne itself, and Alaric, whatever his shame, was still the king. But he ended her all the same as surely as any court could have, and he did it in the way Rowan had opened the box-room, in the open before witnesses with clean hands. Her household was dissolved. Her keys were taken up, every one. Her son Cassius, who had grown fat on her favor, found the favor gone and the doors that had opened for him closed. And Morwenna herself was removed from the palace to a distant royal house in the cold north of the realm, with a fixed allowance and a plain instruction that she would not return, and would not come near the children, and would live out her days in the quiet exile of a person who has been found out and cannot, for the sake of the crown, be destroyed. She had spent her life arranging herself to the center of things, and she ended arranged to the very edge, in a cold house, alone with the knowledge of exactly why. But I have kept the best of it for last, because it is the part that matters, and it is the child. They made the bear right. That was Rowan's doing, and it tells you everything about the man. He could have burned Barnaby, a great many people would have said the thing was tainted now, unclean, and thrown it on the fire and bought the child a new one, glossy and blameless and strange. Rowan would not hear of it. He said, and I was there when he said it, that the wickedness had been in the eye, not in the bear, and that to burn Barnaby would be to let Morwenna take from the child the one comfort 3 generations of her family had loved her into, which was the last thing she had reached for and would not be given. So the little machine's eye was cut out of the dark glass, and the cartridge holder lifted from the belly and handed to Lord Ansell with the rest of the evidence. And then the same town seamstress who had wept to learn what she'd been used for, Alara sent for her specially, set a new eye into Barnaby's face, a true glass eye, matched at last, after 30 years, to the color of the other, so that the bear ended the whole affair looking better than he had before it, both eyes dark and warm and honest. The eye of a thing that has watched 3 generations of children into safe sleep and will watch a 4th, and never again anything worse. Malin was told a version of the truth. Rowan insisted on that too, that she not be lied to, that a child spied on in her own room not be handed a comfortable falsehood that would only make the eventual truth a second wound. She was told, gently and at her mother's knee and in her own good time, that a wrong person had done a wrong thing with a machine, and that it had been found and stopped, and that she had never been in any danger, and that a great many people had worked very hard and very secretly to keep her safe, and that the bear was mended now and hers forever and would never again be anything but her friend. She was 9 and grave and serious, and she took it in the way she took everything, with a long silence and then a small handful of exactly the right questions, and when she had asked them all and been answered truly, she picked up Barnaby and looked for a long moment into his mended eyes, and then she held him against her chest, and that was the end of her fear. Children are more resilient than we let ourselves believe when we tell them the truth and stand between them and the dark. She came to find me some days after. I was on my post at the foot of the private stair, being furniture, and a small grave figure came and stood in front of me and waited until I looked down, which a guard is not supposed to do, and I looked down. She did not say very much. She said that Uncle Rowan had told her it was a smell that started it, that I had smelled something wrong and not talked myself out of it, and she wanted to know if that was true. I said it was. She thought about that for a while, the serious way she thought about everything. And then she said, "Then you were paying attention to my room when nobody was supposed to be paying attention to my room, but you were the good kind." And I said, "Yes, Princess, I hope I was the good kind." And she nodded, satisfied, having sorted the whole terrible business into its proper place in her orderly heart, and she went back up the stairs to her mended bear, and I stood my post, and I found that my eyes were not quite dry, and I was glad there was no one on that stair to see it. Prince Rowan kept his word to me too. Some weeks after it was all settled he sent for me, and I stood before the Crown Prince expecting, I think, a purse or a word of thanks or a better posting, and I got something I have valued more than any of those. He told me what he had said he would tell me that first morning with his hand on my shoulder, what it was worth, the thing I had done. He said that any brave man will act on a certainty, and that the palace was full of brave men who would have torn the bear open the moment they suspected it and lost everything, and that the rare thing, the thing worth more than courage, was the discipline to be right and hold your hand, to leave the wrong in place one more night than your heart could stand, because that was the road that ended in justice instead of noise. He said that was not a thing you could train into a man. He said it was a thing a man either was or was not, and that I was, and that from that day I stood at whatever door in the palace held his children and answered to him, and that if I ever again smelled hot dust where there should be none, I was to trust it, and to come straight to him, and to never ever talk myself out of it. I stood that door for the rest of my service. I stood it the day Malin left it, grown, a grave and steady woman who could gentle any frightened thing in the realm, off to a life of her own with an old honey-brown bear packed carefully at the top of her trunk. I stood it the day Torin, grown too, and every inch the clever man that clever boy had promised, came and found me and made good at last on the drink I had promised him, and told me everything I had got wrong about the wireless, laughing, and we were both of us a little wet about the eyes by the end of it, and neither of us pretended otherwise. And I have thought in the long quiet years since about how near a thing it was. How I stood on a midnight landing at the turn of the hour and smelled hot dust where there had never been hot dust before, and how my whole careful mind rose up at once to explain it away. The radiator, the old wiring. A sergeant does not open a sleeping princess's door on the strength of a smell. And how I nearly, so very nearly, finished my round and signed the landing book and let it go. If I had, the eye would have gone on watching. The scheme would have deepened and moved and hidden itself better, and perhaps never been found at all, and a child would have grown up spied upon in the one room where she believed herself safe, and never known, and been the poorer in some deep unnameable way for all her life, and none of us the wiser. It was a smell of hot dust that saved her. A small thing, the smallest thing, and the whole of what I have learned in a long life of standing at doors is packed into that the body knows wrongness before the mind consents to it, and that a man's whole worth can come down in the end to whether he trusts the twitch in the back of his own neck at the turn of midnight when it would be so much easier not to. I trusted it, that once, when it mattered most. I will thank God for it with my last breath. And to any young man who ever stands a lonely watch and smells something that should not be there and feels his careful mind begin, so reasonably, to explain it away, I have exactly one thing to tell him, and it is the thing that mended a bear and saved a child and gave the rest of my service its meaning. Do not talk yourself out of the smell. Go and look.